Welcome to the last part of our series, part 4 of 4, talking about human design energy centers and how we can really lean into these defined energy centers that we have and how we can be very mindful and aware and bring more awareness to the conditioning of our undefined or open energy centers. If you haven't watched part 1, 2, and 3, please make sure that you go back and watch part 1, 2, and 3 before watching this final video. We're going to be talking about the spleen, the solar plexus, and the root in today's video. So let's start with our spleen. Our spleen is our center of instinct. When we have these terms like, I don't know why, I can't really explain it, but I just felt this way, that might be your spleen talking. When we talk in terms of like vibes, like the vibes are off, or the vibes of this room, or the vibes of this person, we're just misaligned, we're off, that's your spleen talking. The spleen is also our center of well-being. It's the center of fear, where we hold fear and where we have fear in our body. It's also one of our centers of connection to community. So if you have a defined spleen center, if you're a splenic authority, you have this direct connection to tuning into your instinct. Our instinct, or our spleen center, truly talks in these small whispers. It's not going to be this really loud voice in our head, but it's going to be this like bodily knowing, especially as we work on developing our connection and our communication to our spleen center. It really turns into this bodily connection and this bodily feeling or felt sense of this is in alignment, this isn't in alignment, this is a yes, this is a no. Some defined spleen conditioning that we might run into is having this strong instinctual response, but society telling us that it's wrong, that you can't trust your instincts, that you can't just trust like the vibes are off. So that's some invitation, especially when you're working in your business, is trusting your instinct, trusting oftentimes your original initial response, trusting that and going with that. Trusting if you feel like the vibes are off, or trusting if you feel like this client isn't in alignment with you and your vision. Trusting if this business partner, even though they might be saying all the right things, but something within you, something within your body feels contracted, feels closed off, it feels like a no to you. Trusting that and honoring that. If you have an undefined spleen center, other people's fears, other people's instinctual responses might be influencing your spleen center, because again, with defined centers, the defined centers illuminate and magnify our whatever undefined center we have. So I have an undefined spleen center. One of the biggest lessons in my life has been asking myself and learning how to answer, is this fear mine? Does this fear belong to me? Is this anxiety mine? And we have the same conversation if we move directly across our body graph chart to our emotional solar plexus, our center of emotions. We can have the same conversation. So our solar plexus is our center of emotions. It's our emotional well-being. This is our connection with others, our connection to spirit. It's our connection to our truth and our needs. So when you have a defined emotional center, you feel your emotions very strongly. So if you have a defined emotional center, you might be an emotional authority. And having that, again, when we talk about riding that emotional wave, that's going to be huge for you, is really allowing yourself to deeply feel your emotions, allow them to process through. We only actually need 90 seconds to allow an emotion to flow through our body. Where we get stuck is we get stuck using and getting our emotions all up in our head, and they get stuck within our head center. And that's where we hold on to them, and we have that like repetitive emotional loop. But to feel the emotion in your body, to allow that emotion to process through, takes about 90 seconds. And then we can move on. Emotional authorities or defined emotional centers also tend to be a little bit more uncertain. So trusting that your 80% certain that this is a yes, that this is aligned, that this is something that I want to do in my business, that this business partner is aligned, whatever it is, your 80% sure is other people's 100% sure. So leaning into that, allowing yourself to deeply feel all of your emotions and almost find that like equilibrium between the highs and the lows, that's your answer. With our undefined emotional centers, this is where we have a very similar conversation with our undefined splenic centers, is when you have an undefined emotional center, asking yourself the question, is this emotion mine? What is my actual emotion here? What's my actual emotional response here? Is it somebody else's, or is this emotion mine? People with the undefined solar plexus tend to be those ones that are called like empathic when we get into the conversation, like when we weed out, like, is this a trauma response or is this like an empathic response? That's a whole conversation that we should have for another day, but I'll just leave that as it is. But having an undefined emotional center, being very aware of deciphering what is yours, what is someone else's. And that's really your superpower in business, is deciphering and being able to deeply feel your clients' emotions, deeply feel what your clients are moving through. Undefined emotional solar plexus, like really great therapist, really great coach, because you can feel what your client or your patient is experiencing and walking through. And that's a superpower. And lastly, we're going to get into our final energy center, which is our root center. It's the lowest energy center, also a motor center. It's our fourth motor center. Our root center is our connection to the earth. It's our connection to groundedness, to rootedness. It's also a center of drive. It's our connection to life. This is, if you remember, in our second video when we're talking about our crown center, I said you have two pressure centers. One is our crown, one is our root. Now we're talking about the second pressure center, which is our root. So we can feel a lot of pressure in regards to stress and worry. So if you have a defined root center, you have a consistent way in which you process and handle and deal with stress and pressure. You tend to handle pressure pretty well because you have that consistent way in which you process it. And if you have a defined root center, you have a pretty consistent access to your drive. With my defined root centers, this is a business tip more in terms of taking care of yourself, but defined root centers tend to have a lot of that like drive and have a lot of that stress and pressure. So making sure that you're physically getting that energy out with physical exercise, with actually physically sweating and getting rid of that energy before you come to the end of the day and you're here to relax. To my undefined root centers, like myself, I actually have a completely open root center. We can feel that pressure, just like the mental pressure of having an undefined crown. We can feel that pressure of stress, that pressure to complete, that pressure to have constant drive, to complete, to consistently be productive and be doing. Again, paying attention to who you're hanging out with. Are you hanging out with someone that has a defined root center, and are you amplifying their defined? Are you feeling their defined amplification of the root center, where you feel maybe even more pressure to produce and do and complete and always be going? With undefined root centers, one business self-care tip is create these transitions in between the pieces of your day, from like work to home, or even getting up, like having like this transition moment from like getting up, maybe doing like a meditation or going on a little walk before you transition into work. That's going to be really supportive. But with the root center, some questions that are really important to ask is like, is this pressure mine? Is this drive? Is this feeling that I need to complete and to do? Is this mine? If we have an undefined root center, and kind of similar to like the ego center, the willpower center, if you're constantly doing just for the sake of doing, that's what leads to burnout. That's how we can stop the burnout cycle, is by really checking in. Again, one more time, checking in with our authority and making sure that what we are doing, what we're completing, the pressure that we're feeling is in alignment with our direction, where we want to go, is in alignment with our identity, in alignment with our business. And that, if you watched all 4 videos, we did it, baby. You made it to the end. That's all of our energy centers. Really take some time to dive into your defined centers. Find your rootedness, find your groundedness, what brings you into this world, what gives you that structure in this life, and structure your business around that. If you have a defined G center, structuring your business around that knowing of who you are, where you're going, your identity, right? Structure your life around, and your business and your relationships around your defined centers, and then maybe pay attention to the undefined centers. Maybe explore and dive a little bit deeper into those undefined centers of conditioning, where conditioning shows up, maybe the ancestral conditioning that shows up. If you can look up your parents' or even your grandparents' human design chart, you don't even have to really know their chart. After you learn the human design centers, a lot of time you can guess, and you can make some pretty educated guesses of like, oh, I know that my grandpa must have had an undefined root center or whatever, right? Like once you get a little bit more knowledge, and dive into that, and dive into what the benefits, what the superpowers of your undefined centers are, and lean into that, always coming back to your authority. I will see you in the next 4-part series. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss any of these videos. Feel free to check out my podcast, which is also Journey to Well. Feel free to connect with me on Instagram @_Journey to Well. Dive into our community. I am so happy to connect with you. I'll see you in the next video. Be well.